Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Christus, der uns selig macht, which translates to Christ who saves us. Very interesting chorale. There's some unique harmonic attributes in this particular chorale. Sorry, my mouse is in the way there. That challenge our conventional understanding of Western harmony, at least in the sense that we sort of expect harmony to function a particular way the majority of the time. That is to say that we expect certain chords to move from one to the next. And in this chorale, sometimes we see extensions of that functionality or just deviations from that understanding entirely. Also, before we get started, I'm really sorry about the print quality on this one. My printer is, I think, on its last leg, and as you can see, it's having a hard time centering things on the page, so the final bar lines are removed, and you can see that there's like a big black ink splotch here. Hopefully it's mostly legible. If not, my apologies. Hopefully my handwriting will compensate for what's harder to read on the page. So let's talk about overall key before we get started. No key signature. We start on E major, we end on E major. Interestingly enough, I don't think we're in the key of E major here. That would be quite unprecedented for Bach to be in the key of E major without any key signature. I think we're in the key of A minor, and we're starting off with the 5 chord. And then right after our 5 chord, we get another 5 chord as well, E, B, G sharp, and E, so no need to reiterate the Roman numeral. We then get A, C, A, and E. It's A minor in root position, our tonic triad. And then on the next beat, we have G natural, B natural, B natural, and E natural. And we also have this C going on right here in the tenor, which I actually think is our chord tone here, and this B is an accented neighbor tone, but really what's happening on this beat is some type of passing harmony, whatever it is. So if you're analyzing it with the B as the chord tone, this would be E minor in first inversion, so that would be a 5-6, which is a totally valid analysis. I'm going to analyze this as a 3 chord, a 3-7 chord more specifically in second inversion, C major over G, otherwise known as a 3-4-3 chord in the key of A minor. And the only reason why I'm analyzing it as a 3 chord is because in this 2 chord progression here of 3 going to F, D, A, and D, this is a 4 chord in first inversion, and 3 going to 4, especially in inversion, is a much more common chord progression than 5 going to 4 in inversion, albeit when we do see a minor 5 chord, 4 is often a subsequent chord. So I really think that this chord here is a bit ambiguous. It's the first of a handful of chords that are ambiguous, so I think however you analyze this, it's accurate. Regardless, we're getting ready for our cadence here, which is a half cadence. Lots of half cadences in this chorale. Passing tone in the tenor. We then have E, F, A, and C. Interesting chord here. I do think that this is less likely to be a F major 7 chord in second inversion, third inversion. Rather, it's probably this D that's our chord tone here, and this E is just an accented non-chord tone, kind of functioning like an anticipation almost, but really it's this D here that's our chord tone, D, F, A, and C, which would just be taking our 4 chord, putting it in root position, and adding the 7th, D minor 7, and then that takes us to 5, E, B, G sharp, and B with that tritone leap in the tenor. Bach loves those tritone leaps in the tenor. Plain old 5 chord. All right, next phrase, we have another half cadence that ends in the key of A minor, but we do have some departure from A minor to possibly D minor here with B flat and C sharp going on at the same time. But also we have this F sharp here, which is quite peculiar. There's probably a couple of different things that could potentially be happening here. The first thing that could be happening is this sort of co-opting of F sharp as both a chord tone in the key of A minor as well as a chord tone in the key of G minor. I think that's actually what's happening here. Even though we have C sharp going on, I think we are alluding to G minor for a little bit here as well. So I don't think there's a particularly elegant way of going about analyzing this. There's going to be a lot of quick movement going on here. So starting things off, I think we do have a common tone here in terms of A minor being a potential departure chord here. So we might want to say 1, 5 going to 1. But I'm going to say instead of 5 going to 1 that this F sharp here is actually our chord tone for the sake of the grand scheme of where the harmonies are going. And instead this F sharp is making this an F sharp diminished chord, which is diatonic to the key of A minor, just in the melodic minor variety. And we would expect this 6 probably to go to a 7 chord and then a 7 to go to 1. But instead we see F sharp functioning as our leading tone here in the key of G minor. And instead we have 6 turning into 7, 6. And that takes us to G minor, G, B flat, G, and D, which is our tonic triad in the key of G minor, of course. And this is just one of those cases where we have sort of 2 and 7 occupying the same space. In G minor, A would be our 2, F sharp would be our 7, and Bach very commonly plays with this idea of 2 and 7 being chords that, despite being a third apart and sharing 2 tones in common, have widely different functions. And I think Bach is aware of that, even though maybe that language was not codified at his time or during his time. Maybe it was. I'm not a scholar on like the history of Western music theory, but I think it's very possible. It's very possible that maybe language like function could have been floating around, but Bach clearly understood how music was operating at his time and chose to engage with it in his own special way. Regardless, I think this G minor here is actually going to be our common tone that takes us very quickly to the key of D minor here, because it also happens to be our 4 chord in the key of D minor. That takes us to C sharp, B flat, G, and E. C sharp fully diminished 7th root position, that's our 7-7 chord. That takes us to another dominant functioning chord here, kind of a prolongation of the dominant function here with F as our accented non-chord tone, and E with this same C sharp, A, and E again. That's a 5 chord this time, first inversion. So 7 going to 5, not really a progression in this case because they're both serving dominant functions, but yeah, I think what Bach is doing here is just really prolonging the tension before we get the D minor that will inevitably usher us back to the key of A minor. As we know, we end in the key of A minor with this E major chord at the end. We would expect a dominant functioning chord to take us to a tonic, which it does. D, A, F, and D. D minor root position. Again, we see D minor happening on the downbeat of the sort of cadential measure. Same point in the phrase, but this time we're seeing D minor turn from A. Sorry, I jumped the gun here. This should be our tonic that is being reconsidered as our 4 chord, because we're making the argument that we're in the key of A minor at this point, or at least I'm making that argument. You don't have to make that same argument if you don't feel like that's the case. But I think my argument is a strong argument regardless. We have A, E, and C. It's A minor in root position, our tonic triad, now that we're in the key of A minor. And then we have E major at the end here, like I've talked about a couple of times. E, G sharp, E, and B. Okay, next phrase, we get another half cadence, but this time we move to the key of D minor. Not immediately, but we see C sharp going on here in the bass at the cadence, so we're going to move to D minor at some point. We'll see how that happens. We start off with the tonic triad, A, C, E, and A minor, G sharp, B, E, and B, E major in first inversion, A, E, and C, tonic triad, root position, passing tone in the tenor, F, C, F, and A. I think there's an argument here to maybe say that this D is also our chord tone, but I'm going to say that this is just a 6 chord. You could analyze this as a 4/6 chord as well, but this is also going to be our point that takes us to the key of D minor, where F is now being repurposed as our 3. That then takes us to C sharp, E, E, and A. Again, sort of a non-functional or non-traditionally functional progression. Of course, any chord can, at the end of the day, go to any other chord, but regardless, we expect 3 as a chord to sort of fit in the middle of the cycle of falling fifths. 3 typically goes to 6. We also see Bach go the opposite direction against the grain of the circle of fifths, as well as cycle of falling fifths, where 3 goes to 7, or 3 goes to 4 in some cases as well. But that doesn't suggest that you can't have any chord go to any other place. We have a passing 7th going on the melody here. Before we go to D minor, D, A, D, and F, root position, and then we end on a 5 chord, A, C sharp, and E, our dominant root position. As we close up, or I guess as we finish off our first system here, we have another half cadence in the key of D minor in the first phrase, where we stay in one key for more than one phrase. We have 5 going to 1 here, D, A, D, and F. We then have C natural, C, C, E, and G. It's very difficult at this point to hear this as anything other than a movement to the key of F major perhaps, but something that I've kind of trained myself to do, instead of hearing every 7/3 chord progression that is a natural 7th, not a leading tone 7th in a minor key. I've trained myself to not hear that as a modulation to the parent, or not necessarily the parent major, but the relative major, just because it sounds like that in the middle of the scale doesn't necessarily mean that we've modulated. So in this case, we have C functioning as 7. Maybe it's functioning as 5 of 3 as well. I've seen that particular analysis in other books, other than the ones that I've been more recently in contact with. We then have F major afterwards, F, C, E flat, and A, but we have that added E flat, which is F 7, which means that we have some type of dominant action going on here. 5, 7 of 6. If we're in the key of D minor, B flat is our 6 and F is its dominant, therefore 5 of 6 is going on here. And we have a textbook example of Bach's unique chromatic bass lines. Typically it's the chromatic bass lines that are going down that are the more interesting ones, because Bach can chain leading tones from one to the next to tonicize the following chord. But in this case, Bach has an interesting ascending chromatic bass line going on here. So we have F7, we would expect that to go to B flat, and the next chord doesn't even have a B flat in it. We have we have F sharp, C, D, and A, which is D7 over F sharp, which in the key of D minor, it's kind of interesting, right? We have 5, 6, 5, 5. So functionally what's going on here, I'm so sorry, not of 5, getting ahead of myself here, 5, 6, 5, 4. The tonic spelled as a dominant is the dominant of the subdominant, which is a tongue twister, but if you turn a minor tonic triad into a major tonic triad while still in the minor key, unless it's some type of pick or D third, it can be heard or implied or interpreted as the dominant of the subdominant. So we would expect our 4 chord afterwards, which actually works. That's what we get, G, B flat, D, and G. So we do have some function here. It's just interesting how Bach got there, because this F7 might imply that maybe we had moved to the key of G minor rather than the key of staying in the key of D minor. But I think that this is just sort of an anomaly here, why this passing chord here doesn't ever get referenced more than once. I mean, it's really this E flat here in this chromatic descending line in the alto that makes it interesting more so than the bass line. But regardless, it's all voice leading, right? It's half step movement. It's very smooth. Just because the roots don't have the relationship that we would expect doesn't mean that it's not a working chord progression. I mean, after all, Bach wrote this hundreds of years ago. Passing tone in the tenor. We have another sort of passing tone going on here. The chromatic bass line continues. G sharp, D, D and F. Very interesting chord progression here, or sorry, voicing, where we have a doubled fifth in a diminished seventh chord, which is what we have here, 7, 7 of 5. What's interesting about this is that we don't see the third, but the third isn't really integral to the identity of the diminished chord, because the name diminished comes from the fifth, not from the third. Major and minor chords really need a third in order to give them context. Diminished and augmented chords need their fifth in order to give them context. So yeah, we have 7 of 5 going on here without the third. Then we have our 5 chord here, A, C sharp, and E, A major, root position. Okay, moving on to the next phrase, we have very interesting cadence here where we just move pretty abruptly to the key of G major, which is not a distant key from A minor, but it happens in an abrupt fashion, and we saw sort of an allusion to G major, or just G as a pitch center. It's kind of a distant modulation now that I'm seeing it, A minor to G minor. Those are 2 notches away on the circle of fifths from one another. But we have another half cadence. I think they're all half cadences except for 1. But yeah, we start off with 5 going to 1 here. That's F, A, D, and A. D minor in root position, first inversion, and an A minor that is our 4-6 chord. We do get what I've been calling a mid-phrase modulation, where Bach moves to a key that he does not end the phrase in. So E, B, E, and G sharp, that's our 5 chord. Root position, passing 7th in the bass, and then we get C, C, E, and A. 1-6, very common bass movement where the 7th gets introduced in the bass and then it moves to a chord that's a 5th away, root-wise, and in first inversion. So 5-4-2, 1-6. Even though I'm not going to analyze it as a 4-2 chord, it's effectively a 5-4-2 chord for this moment here on the end of beat 2. Then we get, we get B, D, F sharp, and B. I think this F sharp is an accented non-chord tone. Even though you could technically analyze this as a 2 chord, B minor. Notice that it's 2 minor because of the melodic minor fragment we have going on here with, actually it's less of a fragment and more of like a reference to the pretty much the entire latter half of the scale, but F sharp, G sharp, A is really what I was focusing on here. We have G sharp, B, D, and D. Sorry, G sharp, B, D, and B. That's G sharp diminished over B. 7-6, and we would typically expect a 1 chord after this pattern, 1-6, 7-6 to 1 in root position, very common chord progression. I've been made aware of in a handful of comments about the partimento keyboard tradition, which is a way of improvising harmony over a diatonic scale and different chord progressions to just harmonize the scale in stepwise motion. And this is a very common progression in that tradition. I don't know much about it other than reading the Wikipedia article, but it was a fascinating read, and a handful of people have commented on the video, on videos in the past, that is, about this being partimento tradition. But it's still a common chord progression we see in Bach, not even just with 1 and 7, but with other chord qualities as well, or other chord, other roots as well, 5, 4, 6, 5, 6, or 6, 6, 7, 6, 6, that sort of thing. But anywho, we have our tonic triad and root position afterwards, like we would expect, A, E, A, and C. And I do think this is where we modulate to the key of G major. It's kind of interesting how Bach is going to recontextualize this 1 chord as a 2 chord and then take us directly to a 1 chord. It's very uncommon for us to see 2 go to 1, albeit it's much, much less common to see 2 go to 1 in root position. We do see it from very, very rarely from time to time. You could probably count on one hand the number of chord progressions that consist of 2 going to 1 in root position, but it's not impossible for 2 to go to 1 in root position, but it's much more likely for one of the chords to be inverted, just because the tonic doesn't have as strong of a presence due to the inversion. But we have a passing tone here in the bass before we get our 5 chord at the end of the phrase, D, D, F sharp, and A. D major in root position. Now here is where things get particularly interesting with what's going on here in the bass. We have another sort of flirting with the idea of G minor and D minor kind of coexisting in the same space. And I think when you break the chorale up into 4-bar sections here, there should be a repeat going on here at the end of the phrase. But when you compare where this is happening, we have this second phrase of the B section and second phrase of the A section happening at the same point in their relative sections. But if we just do like a little lead sheet analysis here, we have C minor over E flat, G minor over D, A7 over C sharp, and then we have D minor. So it's difficult to say exactly what's going on because C minor and G minor are related to one another, and then G minor and A7 are related to one another. I think really what's going on here is kind of a similar thing as to what was happening in the the first system, second phrase. So I think we have a direct modulation to G minor here. Now, if we're making the argument that G major is G minor, as Bach often does with his modal mixture, you don't even need to analyze this as a modulation. In fact, I'm going to go against what I said before, and I should have put this in parentheses. You could say that there is a direct modulation to G minor here, because really there's nothing making the argument that we're in the key of G minor in this fragment here, and there's really no argument that's being made in the key of G major in this fragment here. But together, I think in a unified sense, we're in the key of G. But I'm going to put that G minor direct modulation in parentheses, just to emphasize the fact that it could be interpreted in such a way, but you don't necessarily have to interpret it that way. But keeping that in mind, we have C minor over E flat, that's 4/6, and then we have G minor in a second inversion, D, B flat, G, and D. Kind of interesting to see a tonic triad and second inversion in the middle of the phrase, but it's happening as a passing chord, which the textbook has generally gotten right. 6/4 chords do get used with quite a bit less frequency than root position or first inversion triads. But with D minor now being sort of the trajectory moving forward, what's kind of interesting actually is the cadence at the end is an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of G major, which makes me feel like this departure to D minor really is exactly what it sounds like. It's a departure, another mid-phrase modulation here, because like I said, we end on a G major chord, which is interesting. It's very, very fascinating, which makes me wonder whether or not we even move to D major or D minor at all. Let's just experiment and say that we do. So in D minor, if we are in the key of D minor, actually, I don't know exactly how I would analyze that. I don't know how exactly we would analyze that, because in my notes I don't have a modulation. I was looking at the wrong phrase. I'm going to go ahead and say that this C sharp, this A7 chord is actually 5/6/5 of 5. A7 over C sharp, and then instead of going to D major, we go to D minor, D, A, F, and E, which is interesting because this E is sort of functioning like a 9/8 suspension over the bass that doesn't get resolved until the next beat. So suspension is happening over a longer period of time than the what's allowed to resolve in the bass, because by the time it is by the time the ninth gets resolved down to the eighth, it's actually a sixth because the bass moves up a third as well. So we're just going to say 5/6/5 of 5. Why do I use uppercase 5 here rather than lowercase 5? I don't think it really makes a tremendous difference, but because of our relationship with tonal harmony of Bach's time, we're expecting 5 chords to be major. Therefore, 5 of 5 sounds more... 5 of 5 sort of represents the fact that our expectations being subverted. But I think from a semantic standpoint, it doesn't really make a difference. But I think all in all, you could make the argument that we were in the key of D minor here, and that this is 5/6/5, and that this is 1. And then on the next beat, we have 1 in first inversion. But because D minor is not diatonic to the key of G major, and again, we have sort of this spontaneous modulation at the end, maybe just D minor is entering our ears for a little bit, but it doesn't really constitute a full modulation, as the context of the chords afterwards doesn't really support anything other than G major, except for this F natural that's going on here. Because this F natural with D minor going on is just, again, another 5 chord, but in first inversion. And then I think really where we get the modulation is incidentally on the and of the beat, where we have G, B natural, F, and D, which in the key of G major, actually, you know what? Yeah, this is a bit of a head scratcher. I have it written down in my notes as going on here with the G, the B, the D, and the F as 5/7 of 4, because we would expect C afterwards, but instead of getting C, the leading tone resolves, and instead we get kind of an A minor feel, which again is another sort of 2-to-1 progression, but I think this E is actually an accented non-chord tone. It's actually this F sharp here that is our chord tone, making this an F sharp diminished over A, or 7/6, that then takes us to 1. This phrase right here is super anomalous. I don't really know how to fully articulate exactly what's going on here, except for there's a brief departure from G to D, but it doesn't really feel like enough of a departure to constitute an analyzed modulation. And yeah, there's some weird stuff going on here, because we have movement to G, but we keep the F natural, which makes me feel like really we're sort of in maybe even a modal sound world, or it really does feel mostly like mode mixture rather than being in a modal sound world per se. We have E flat, we have B flat, but that presence of C sharp and also that presence of E natural along with the F going on in the bass makes it kind of difficult to make the argument that we're purely in the key of G major, or if we're in the key of G minor. Something's going on here, and it's unique, and there's rooms for interpretation, multiple interpretations, that is, where we move to D minor, where we stay in D minor, and this is a subdominant in an imperfect authentic cadence that I've talked about in videos in the past, where it feels like 4 is just sprung on us at the end, but because there isn't vocabulary to or a term to describe what's happening in one word, like a deceptive cadence or an authentic cadence, we use the vocabulary and warp our perception to best fit it. All right, moving on to the next phrase, we have half cadence, another half cadence, this time in the key of D minor. So who knows, with this allusion to D minor going on here, maybe we were in the key of D minor the whole time. I just don't hear this G major cadence at the end as being in the key of D minor, so something funky goes on here. But we're going to move pretty directly to the key of A minor. I should be careful with the words I use. It's not a direct modulation, but we're going to move promptly to the key of A minor here. So F sharp, D, A, and A. It's D major in first inversion, 5/6. It's our dominant in the key of G, and an A minor that is our 4 chord in first inversion. Passing tone in the tenor, G sharp, B, E, and B. That is E major in first inversion, 5/6. With this melodic minor fragment in the bass, it's quite common for us to see 4/6 going to 5/6, where they're both major as a byproduct of the melodic minor scale. We would expect our tonic afterwards, which is what we get: A, E, and C. A minor, root position, passing tone in the tenor. Then we get A, C, E, and A, which is just an A minor chord in root position. I think you can make the argument that we've moved to the key of D minor at this point over a minor dominant, which is kind of interesting because we get some they're not exactly cross relations, but we have C, oh yeah, they are kind of cross relations, where we have C versus C sharp happening across the bar line. We have B natural, we have D natural with an E and an A. That's not an analyzable chord, but modulating over the minor dominant, I think this is more of a modulation space rather than a point. One of the most difficult things to do when analyzing in some cases is pick and choose where the modulation is going to happen. Sometimes it's very straightforward. Other cases, like, what's going on in here, or really what's going on in here, you have to make decisions as to where the modulation is going to occur in your analysis, but I think by the time we see C sharp, we've probably moved to the key of D minor already, or we're already in the process of modulating. So here what ends up happening is we get 5/6, A major over C sharp, so the C natural turns into C sharp, and really with the profile that this chorale has, with all the unique stuff going on, this doesn't even really surprise me all that much. The fact that we're modulating over a minor dominant, I think it's more so that it's not necessarily that we're modulating over a minor dominant, it's just A is the conduit into D, and it just so happens to be a minor chord here, rather than it being a major chord on the next beat. Of course, you could say the modulation happens as late as D minor here, but saying that a modulation happens after the secondary dominant usually it's in my opinion too late, because if the dominant's goal is to solidify the key, that's probably the device that's being used to modulate from one key to the next. But afterwards we get D minor, D, A, D, and F, and then we cadence on A major with our half cadence, like I said, A, C sharp, and E. And lastly, we have our half cadence at the end of the chorale. It's not uncommon for Bach to half cadence at the end of a chorale, especially in minor. But yeah, we have some interesting chord progressions going on here because of the pedal we have in the bass and the sustained tone in the melody. So I'm making the argument that we move to the key of F major here because of the presence of we don't have any B's to contextualize what's going on here in the first 3 beats, but I think by the time we get to beat 4, we've already started modulating. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting to say. I mean, we could make the argument that we're in the key of A minor here, but it just feels like F is getting such a strong presence because of C major going to F major. But then again, at the same time, C major going to F major, it's going to sound like a minor dominant, it's going to sound like a dominant tonic within the key because they're both major in a minor key. So I'm actually gonna say that this is we're just in the key of A minor at this point. I'm not going to overcomplicate things and say we move to the key of F, even though I originally heard this in the key of F. We have D minor to start things off. Oh, and I said that we don't have a B. What am I talking about? We have a B here. We do not have a D minor to start things off. We have D, B, D, and F, which is 2/6. B minor 7. B diminished, not B minor 7 flat 5. But we have 2 going to C major, C, C, E, and G. So 2/6 going to 3. It's like 7/6 going to 1, really. That takes us to F major. F, C, F, and A. It's our 6. Kind of an interesting chord progression here without anything really directly referencing our tonic just yet. Passing tone in the bass, C, C, F, and A. That is, A, C, F, and A. That's just taking the chord and inverting it. No need to reiterate the Roman numeral. Passing tone in the bass again, C, C, E, and G. It's our 3 chord. Again, you can see here with 3 and 6 oscillating between one another, you can see why one might come to the conclusion that we're in the key of F major or we're in the key of C major because of the lack of really A presence here. But I think it might just be a byproduct of the interesting relationship Bach is exploring here with these scales. But after this passing 7th in the tenor, we get D, A, D, and F. It's D minor in root position. We then get E, G sharp, D, and E, an incomplete 5/7 chord, but a 5/7 chord nonetheless. E, A, C, and E. It's 1/6/4, A minor over E. And then we end the chorale with E major, E, G sharp, B, and E. Sometimes we use a bracket to show that they're related to one another. And that is today's analysis. All in all, such a fascinating chorale. Lots of unique harmonic things going on here. Particularly interesting in the second system, second phrase. Also this very quick modulation to G minor and D minor, and just kind of G minor and D minor coexisting at the same time, that's redundant. Coexisting at both points, there definitely feels like there's intention, and kind of surrounding D with its upper and lower leading tones. It's really fascinating. Bach definitely had a unique relationship with this harmony. I don't think that tonal harmony, in our understanding of it, had fully crystallized at this point, because I don't think harmony immediately following Bach, classical harmony, would really exhibit how Bach harmonized his chorales. In fact, I don't think Bach's contemporaries really harmonized chorales like he did. But also this sort of modulation here where we have a zone where A minor is sort of the starting point to get us to D minor, that's also kind of interesting. And we have some a-traditional secondary dominance going on here, which is really fascinating. Other than that, we have a 2-to-1 chord progression, which is also something that we shouldn't sleep on. And the fact that it's happening with this interesting chromatic bass line, I think, is also something worth noting. But other than that, that's really all I had to say about this particular chorale. If you're interested in getting updates about Bach's chorales and content that I plan to release in the future, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you were helped by my analysis, if you could leave a like, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for supporting the channel by watching the video. I look forward to the next one, and I hope you take care.